Okay, how would you feel at the beginning of this new year if you could draw an image like this? Well, I'm going to break it down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine so that you can have a go and amaze yourself. Okay, so as I explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that not only you learn about the painting techniques and process, but you also learn about the tools of the app that I'm using, PROCREATE. But that isn't to say that you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within PROCREATE, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. And as always, the color profile I'm using is the sRGB, and it's the code that ends in 2.1. Now in terms of the brushes, I'm going to keep it pretty straightforward. I'm going to use within airbrushing the soft brush, the medium brush, within inking the studio pen, within drawing the Oberon brush, and then possibly within luminance the bokeh lights. In terms of the colors, I've pre-selected a color palette here, and each of these colors has associated with it, if you go to the value section and look here, it has a hexadecimal code, and each of these codes is linked down in the video description. You just need to copy and paste them into this box one at a time, press enter each time and the color appears up here, and then tap it and repeat the process for each and every color. Now that might take you some time, so you might find it helpful. Down in the video description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free, and yeah, it will just save you some time. And obviously Patreon is the place where you can support this channel, gain access to exclusive content, extended versions of these tutorials for example. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who've supported the channel either currently or in the past. It really has made a huge difference in my ability to keep creating content for everyone. So thank you so much for that. With all of that said and done, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is just rotate my canvas. It is the A4 canvas, but now we've got it in a portrait orientation. We're going to go to our colors. First color on the top row, drag from the circle. Now it's not quite white, it's just a little bit off, a bit cooler, which is ideal for this subject matter. Then we may also stay on layer 1, go back to our colors. I'm going to use the second color on the top row. Go to my brushes, I'm going to go to the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to put the brush size at around 10% and 100% opacity. And then towards the top, I'm just going to create some peaks and spikes and just make an irregular line there. Then I'm going to go back to my colors. I'm going to use the third color on the top row, and I'm just going to follow a similar line but below. Back to my colors, I'm going to use the fourth color, and again just do something quite similar there. And then going to go back to my colors, use the fifth color, and you notice I'm making this a little bit flatter as we go further down, not completely flat but a little bit compared to the very top. Then I'm going to go to the sixth color, do that again a bit flatter, and then back, and we'll use the seventh color like so. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur that in to about the 30% and deselect. Now that's just created really a pretty subdued and blurred out background and gives us a context for everything else. However, just to add some further disturbance in that background, I'm going to go to the smudge, tap on it again. I'm going to choose the soft brush and put the size at 10% and probably about 50% opacity or strength. And then just at certain points, I'll just nudge it up slightly. Just make a bit more of a feature, especially where it naturally seems to have created a bit of a spike anyway. Just push it around a little bit more. Maybe even sharpen it down to 5%. You just want to really make a feature of a couple of things here. Imagine they're distant trees, tree line. Just make them a little bit more apparent. Really not very much, just a suggestion at that top edge like that. So it's subtle, but it goes quite a long way. Then I'm going to go back to my layers, create a new layer, layer 2. Going to go back to my brushes. I'm going to use the medium brush with an airbrushing. Back to my colors, I'm going to use the first color on the middle row. I'm going to put the brush size at 5% and not quite 100%, maybe about 80, and then just down maybe in the lower third. we're just going to create a line of this. Now it's not going to be particularly noticeable, and that's okay. Just gives us a warm base to work from. We're going to have some sunlight pouring in here that's going to affect our little sapling as it grows, and it's just going to create a warm kind of base to add some other elements on top of. So just scribble that down a little bit and let it disappear. That's fine. I'm going to have a little bit of a rise here in the middle where it's going to sprout out from, and then allow it to sort of dip on this side, and maybe just have it a little bit lower on this side. Then we go back to our colours. I'm actually going to go back to these colours at the top. I'm going to use the 9th colour, the last colour on that top row. Keep it on the medium brush, but put it up to 10% this time, maybe down to about 50% opacity. And then I'm just going to bring it into the bottom edge here, like so, and then we can go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just blur that in to about like 30%. I'm going to go back to my layers and create a new layer. And this time I'm going to change the blend mode from normal by tapping on that little N, scrolling down the list and putting on add. We know it's been selected because the little N changes to an A. Then on this layer, I'm going to go to the Drawing, Oberon brush. Now I'm going to reset it just to show you what I've done to change it. Tap on it again, we go into the settings, stroke path, and the spacing is set to 5% by default, but I definitely want to increase that to about 50. And then I can just click done. And that just means now we get a nice sort of spacing apart of those textures when we add them. Go to our colours, we'll use the first colour on the top row again, and with a brush size of maybe 5%, 70%, strength opacity, and if you press hard you get big shapes, lightly you get smaller shapes, so just be aware of that. So sort of medium pressure. I'm just going to start redefining this shape that we put in there originally. We've blurred it out, so just with a few taps, I'm going to go in there and I'm just going to redefine it a little bit. This is on a separate layer, so we can go in and blur some of this later on. I'm just going to redefine that kind of bump, just with some taps. I don't want to drag it too much. A little bit of that, if it occurs here and there, is okay, but not too much. And bring that down, similar to the original kind of shape that we made. We've got some of the hint of that warmth still remaining that we added before, and that's all we really needed. And once we kind of reclaimed that edge, we're going to go ahead and create a new layer. This time, keep the normal blend mode. We're going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, and we're going to use the 6th colour on the top row. 5% size and only 10% opacity. And I'm just going to trace along that edge a little bit. Just bump it up, take it along that line, and then I can just scribble it down. And then I'm going to go over it again, and we're going to get a few streaks and passes and just create a kind of sense that there's layers to this. Add some nice texture, and that's kind of what we need. You take it really close to the edge even. Bring it sort of further down. I'm going to also put the brush size up to maybe 10%. Just circle it in a little bit and then bring it down here. Then I'm going to create a new layer, layer 5. Still in with the Oberon brush. I'm going to go for the 5th colour, 5% size, 30% opacity, and I'm just going to be careful not to do it in obvious streaks or circles so you get the obvious line, but in a slightly kind of irregular series of dashes and points and just scribbles so it becomes kind of random. Just start to scribble this in a little bit. Maybe avoid the edges a little bit and just start to concentrate the darker colours towards the centre area. Just a few taps, that kind of thing. So not too much of that. Then we're going to change colour. We're going to go for the 7th colour on the top row again. Nice vibrant blue. We can go again, just kind of soften that in. Go over the top. Again, just avoid the very edges perhaps. We're going to have it just sort of bleached out. A few taps lets it dissipate out. And as we come further towards the centre, we just join it all together. Bring it a little bit lower down, perhaps with this colour. Randomly kind of scribble it in. Just doing kind of irregular movements really. Something like this you can see. Something like that. When it soften off towards the edge, like so. Just generally scribble it around. Can allow it to come a little bit further down as well. Want some of that texture in the lower bit. We may just blur this out a little bit, but some of it there is important. Then Maybe I'll go for the 7th colour. So we used the 5th and the 6th colour, now we're going for the 7th colour. Same settings. Back again, I can just go over the top of that and it just will subdue and soften some of those darker colours a little bit. Just layers of texture really at this point. It's going to bring it together. So you want some of that darker base as like the shadow underneath, and then you can kind of create lighter tones on top. And it just builds up the texture in quite a nice way. And again, maybe we could increase the size of the texture, 7%, just keep it random, allow it to come kind of further down. Back to our colours, perhaps we need to go for the brightest colour, so the first colour on the top row, back down again to the 5% size, still all of this at the 30% strength, and just near the top, we're going to kind of blend that edge in with everything else that we've got. So just keep this as more points than a scribble. Allow it to kind of soften together a little bit. And then yeah, maybe a little bit more concentrated on this side, perhaps. I mean, you know, you can vary it up. There might be some lumps and shapes that just catch the light a little bit more in some places. Vary it up, something like this. I'm going to go back to our layers and create a new layer, layer 6. And on this layer, we've got the blend mode set to normal. We're going to go to the soft brush with an airbrushing. We're going to go for the second color, rather, the first dark color on the middle row. Going to have it at 2% size and 50% opacity. And we're going to go almost to the top, but we're going to leave a section still highlighted. And we're just going to create an area perhaps where the little sapling can emerge from. So we're going to lay down quite a stark dark color initially, and then we can soften it in with some lighter colors afterwards. So I'm just creating a little bit of a blob, an area that is quite dark. Something like this initially. Then we can go to the third color, stay on the same layer, make sure it's quite low on the 2% size, and it's just a slight hint softer. This color, not quite as dark, so we're creating some variation. And then perhaps we could, you know, really turn it down, super low on the 2%, maybe even just into the 1%. And we could have some things that are just sticking out, some more kind of anomalous textures, twigs, points of texture that are just laying around. Just some stray little details, things that stick out here and there, little anomalies. And we've got other colours we can use for some of these too. But just to begin with, just create some breaks in that snow, fine textures of things that are just maybe some dots over here. Might turn the opacity up actually to 70%. Create some more granular little pieces of texture, and that can all be very good. Again, just more scribbles, just more debris in and around this. Can be quite scruffy. Just a real kind of splat of a shape with, yeah, just a little bit of chaos in and around it. Can always refine that as we go, but just some, yeah, just some anomalies there to begin with. Then I'm going to go to the second to last color, so the 8th color on the top row, and I'm just going to use this now to add some highlights amongst the dark areas. Perhaps I'll turn the strength of that down a little bit, so 50%. Maybe even lower. Let's put it down to the 30. And we're just creating some highlights. We have a lot of darkness on that patch of soil poking through, but we're going to have some highlights on it too. And just add some texture. Keep it kind of random. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 7. I'm going to go in with the inking studio pen, which I'm going to reset. So third color on the middle row, studio pen, set to 50% size and 100% opacity. And then I'm just going to go from pretty much the middle here, from the soil around the center, and just bend it like that kind of a shape. Then from around this point, I'm going to bend it that way. And from here, I'm going to bend it the other way. And from down here, I'm going to bend it out, down and curve it like this. And then from about here, I'm going to bend it like that. Now these kind of lines are difficult to do, so one thing we could do is tap on the studio pen, go to the stabilization, and turn the amount of streamline up to maybe 60%. That means when we draw, it's just easier to do nice curves. And if you're struggling with these shapes, we could trial that. So start from the center, curve it that way, and then back. Then from this point, I'm going to just decrease the pressure and bend it up there. Up here, decrease the pressure, bend it over there, and just get some slightly nicer flowing shapes. Bend it like this, and then have it going around there. Maybe I just need to thicken up the base of it there a little bit. I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it, and put on the alpha lock. Switch to the airbrushing soft brush. Go in with the fourth color on the middle row. Brush size, well, it doesn't have to be too big, 5%, opacity at about 40. And then just at the very top, we'll bring that lighter color in. Bring it down, go over it again. It needs to be extra light near the top. And then we're going to bring it down almost to the bottom, but not quite, like so. Then I'm going to switch to the fifth color, and again, just about halfway, bring it up, like so. Then we can go to the sixth color, and we're just going to brighten up these edges quite nicely. Go to the seventh color, and yeah, you get the idea. We can just kind of further brighten them up as they go further along, especially the leaves that grow from the main stem, like that. Now I'm only going to use that as a template, so I'm going to create a layer above that. I'm going to go to the, well, probably the second color on the bottom row to begin with the soft brush with an airbrushing, low on the 2% size and 100% opacity, which is really too strong initially, but bear with me. I'm going to go to this area and I'm going to bring up a nice shape for our leaf. Bring it in here. It's not particularly neat, doesn't matter. Drag and flood fill that leaf. Let's bring in another leaf over here. Have it kind of have a little point. Join it up. Drag and flood fill. We'll do another one up here. Drag and flood fill. Maybe there could be an overlapping section in here as well. Why not? Flood fill. And then maybe just another one that hugs close to it here. And again, just close the shape. Flood fill. And that's going to be the brightest of the colours. So we can create a new layer. Tap on it and put on clipping masks. That means that anything we add with a different colour, for example, can only be contained in the shapes of the layer below it, which is really useful. And what I want to do now is I want to go to the eighth colour on the bottom row, still with the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to put it down to just into the 1% and about 40% opacity. And I'm going to start adding the veins in the centre of these leaves. So let's try and get the curve right. So follow the general kind of curve, make it nice and graceful. This one is kind of folded on its side, so you're going to see the veins that run in more of this kind of a shape from the side. But we can have it go around the edge too. And this edge, and same for this, so we can have it going around the edge. And here, so I want to create a little bit of a separation of those shapes. And the kind of spine, the veins that run off the center. And then one for the one behind it as well. I'm going to go to the first color and I'm just going to start varying up some of these shades just to create a little bit more variation. So maybe I'll put it up to 2%. Just have it smoothed in at this edge, for example, a little bit darker. Maybe because there's an overlap there of 2, we need a bit of a shadow. We can perhaps go in with an even darker color for that. But let's just begin the process. Maybe a bit of a darker shade coming in here. Didn't really add anything along that edge, so I can just do it with this color, it's not a problem. Go along my colors. I'm going to go for this really nice color, so the fifth color, just into the 2%. 40% is a little bit strong for this color, so we'll go to about 25%. And well, we can just start bringing it in here. Again, you're going to have some variation of tone. Just bring a nice sort of shape in here. Maybe again, along this edge, we can just make that a little bit darker. And we've got this overlap. Again, let's not forget that. So let's just darken up that overlap section. Maybe even go over the veins a little bit, just so that we don't forget them. Work along that top edge. Now this whole colour, I think, probably should be cool colours like this. So I'm going to use the colour that we've just got, maybe just colour over the whole thing, maybe go up on the opacity to 50%. I just want to make the whole leaf a little bit cooler, like so. Go over it a couple of times, maybe go to the fourth colour, maybe just on this side of that leaf and stopping at the centre divide. Maybe it's just catching the light, reflecting some sunlight a little bit rather than being as much translucent. The sunlight is actually hitting it and we're seeing the reflection perhaps. So just run along that top edge. Maybe we could make more of that, so we could go to an even brighter colour, maybe go for the, well, maybe the 9th colour actually. We can just use that hint of blue perhaps in there. Maybe even the 7th colour, just to really bring in a highlight. Why not? Just a bit more of that, and that's just giving it a little bit more variety. Now everything on this layer is just looking a little bit severe, so we'll go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, just blur it in maybe to about 3%. Stick with the soft brush. I'm going to go with the 7th colour and 2% size, 50% opacity, and maybe we could just add some real warmth in with this colour in places where we feel it would add something. So I'm just kind of shading it in there a little bit along the edge. I think it brings a nice element up here. Really vibrant green. I think it's really nice. We can see a little bit at the edge of the layer 7, and that's not so much of a problem. I wouldn't worry too much about that. But we do just want to create some slight kind of shading on this so it doesn't look too flat. So a softening in of one tone into another. So we get some real bright areas perhaps just illuminated, but the edges are just kind of softened in like this. I think it works better. Back to the 5th colour, 1% size. Let's just really sharpen up this particular detail. Get a nice darker edge along there. Colour that in a little bit. Possibly a bit strong. With a 50%, maybe we put it back down. 20%, 2% size, just make a pass over it there. Maybe could take it up to the top edge as well. It's quite a nice dark green. I quite like the effect that it has. So I'm going to do perhaps with some of that at 1%, just at the top end of 1%, maybe 30%, and just opacity, and just go around some of these edges with this darker green. I think it just really brings out definition in some of the areas really nicely. If we're losing some of these details, for example, of the veins, it's quite a nice thing to add back in. Perhaps we just need to create the spine of that leaf in there a little bit more. Just some divisions on the top side as well. Okay, I'm going to go in with the 8th colour again, low on the 1% size and really quite low, maybe about 15% strength. And whenever we have leaves, you have veins that maybe have like subcompartments, you have other little things that go off on the inside, maybe even 15% a little bit strong. So let's just subdue that more, and we'll put it at maybe about the 8% opacity. And we've got more little lines that are just subtly visible between the main veins, just creating more kind of subcompartments within the divisions. You don't really need to overly articulate this, just create a sense that there's extra subtlety of detail in there as well. You don't need to go overboard with this, but it just adds to the complexity, the naturalism of it, if you just create some subdivisions, or at least a hint of them anyway. Then I'm going to go back to the 2nd colour on the bottom row. Brightest of the colours, 1% size, maybe about 30% strength, and then we can just use this now to pick out some kind of panels, little sections in the middle of some of these subdivisions. Just tapping in. like so. I think maybe that will do initially. We're going to go to our layers and create a new layer, layer 10, but we're going to put it underneath, a bit tricky to do with an Apple Pencil finger, drag it down underneath layer 8. And I'm going to go in with the first colour on the top row. I'm going to go in with the Drawing Oberon brush again, 2% size, 100% opacity, and I'm just carefully going to go in and around our shapes, and the sunlight is just catching the frost that is clinging to our little sapling, and it's doing its absolute best to emerge out of the snow despite the elements trying to cling on. And you can see then the sunlight is just creating this impression, or rather adding this is really creating the impression that the sunlight is catching the edge of this frost, and it's a really good way of just bringing it all together. And you zoom out straight away and it just brings a real believability to everything. I'm just going to do the leaves initially, so don't worry about the stem. So we're taking it all the way around there. I'm just going to reduce it down to the 1%, still 100% opacity, and maybe just, yeah, if need be, just give another pass of this if it needs to be stronger anywhere. Don't leave any areas undealt with. Might just go back to the top layer and just maybe even bring it around some of the edge of this one, because it does cut in front. So I don't want to do too much of it, just a little bit hint of it like that. It just separates the two a little bit more effectively. Maybe go back to layer 6 for the rest of the detail, still with the same brush and same colour, but in order to have it around the outside of the stem, we just need to have it behind there, don't we? So maybe put it back up again to the 2%, 3% even, and again just bring it around. Zoom in a touch. Maybe there's bits that could just be sticking out. The frost, sometimes we'll have little bits that might just stick out a little further even. Not too many places, but one or two, like that. A real kind of feathered look. Now I'm going to go back to my top layer, create a new layer, and I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to go back to my colours. Probably going to use the 5th colour, zoom in a bit, just into the 2% size, 30% opacity. And I think really we just need to create a bit more of a highlight along that centre area, just to bring out the suggestion that it is still a round shape. It's a little bit flat looking. I think that helps a little bit. Go back to our colours, maybe go for a nice warm colour here, which is the 8th colour. Just where it has a fresh shoot, it's still got a little bit more warmth perhaps, and we can extend that up into the leaf area. Let's move up. Again, a little bit more warmth as it joins here. Go to our colours, got a colour at the 9th colour, not quite the end, just where we have a little juncture, we can just have a couple of points there to create kind of a shadow where it joins. We get back down, bring some of that warmth in down here as well along the edges, and it's just bringing it to life a lot more. Turn that down 1% and just bring some lines of almost definition, sort of veins that run up the stem. Go to layer 10, perhaps I'll just go and adjustments, Gaussian blur, so just the slight frosting around the edge. We don't want it too super sharp, so maybe just a slight blur, 1 or 2% even, softens it slightly, just makes it look a little bit better. We'll keep this on separate layers, so we'll go to the very top layer, create a new layer, go back in with the Drawing Oberon brush, first colour, 3% size, 100% opacity, and yeah, I'm just going to bring some of this kind of frosting into the kind of ground area here, go over some of the textures that we have created, soften them in a little bit, blend them in. Probably need to go to the 6th colour, have a little bit of that. We don't want that on 100%, no, we want it on about 40. Blend those in a little bit. Again, just hints of this blue colour, not too much of that. Then we can go to the 8th colour, down even further, 30%. Bring some of this in for highlights, soften it in around this edge so it's not too abrupt. Back to our colours, maybe something like the 5th colour, and we're just obviously swapping and changing quite abruptly here between different colours, I realise. But we're just trying to add some more texture. It's a bit isolated here on its own, so we need to represent some of the kind of the breaks in the texture perhaps in other areas too. So we can do that quite easily. We should go to the 4th colour. Stick with the Oberon brush, bring it down 3% size, maybe 50% opacity. Bring in some kind of granular bits, some texture. Spread it across the scene a little bit, just so it's not all collected in exactly one place. Maybe even put it up 70% strength. Have it going off the edge of the frame there, of the canvas. Then go to the 5th colour, just a bit more vibrant in terms of the blue. Turn it up 10%, 100% opacity. Maybe have some of these anomalies just off the bottom of the frame here a little bit, not too many of these. Again, back to the 4th colour perhaps, really make them nice and dark. Perhaps I'll go in with the airbrushing soft brush and, you know, a sensible size, maybe 3%, 50% opacity, and I can just make more of a couple of these features, anomalies that are closer to us. Experiment, some varying sizes. We don't want it looking all too exactly the same or too cluttered perhaps, but we definitely need some things to break up the look of this. I think it looks more natural that way. Then on that layer at least, we can go to the selection, maybe freehand, just move it so we can select it and just grab the whole bottom section and the outer edges certainly, and then close the loop. Then we can go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and we can just blur that in a little bit, not excessively, maybe about 8%, looks about right. Deselect, and there. It's just created more of a focus here and less of a focus there. If there's anything that just looks a little bit too much on that layer, well, you can go in with a smudge, set to the soft brush, 5% size, 50% opacity, and if it just looks a bit too much, just tap it in a little bit until it kind of reduces the intensity of it just a little bit, and then that can work a lot better. I'm also going to go in perhaps with a brush I didn't mention, so the Luminance light pen. I'm going to go for the 1st colour, and then 30% size, 100% opacity. Maybe we could just add some light touches in here, just not excessively, just in and around some of these points. It just adds a bit more kind of sparkle and light, so the snow just gives the impression it really is reflecting back some light, but not too much of that. It's easy to overdo that. Then we're going to go, as a last couple of touches, top layer, create a new layer, change the blend mode from normal, tap on the N, scroll down to the add. We're going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush, and we're going to use the colours at the end. So we're going to go for the 9th colour on the bottom row, put the size up to maybe about 60 and the strength at about 10. And just in this very top corner, just going to add it a few times, just tap it in, spread it around a little bit, like so. Just brings a nice sunlight effect in there. Maybe we could even go with the Luminance bokeh lights, reset it. It's a bit much, probably a bit bunched together, but we'll try it with this colour. 100% size, 100% opacity, and just tap it. See if you can get it to arrive in a suitable place. Just experiment a little bit. Something like that I think works. Just a hint of it. Perhaps I will go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just blur that in a little bit, about the 8%. And overall, I'm happy with the way that looks. So I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. Please remember to hit subscribe, leave me a comment. It really helps out the channel and the video. Thanks for watching. I shall catch you back here soon. Bye for now.